Shalom, giving honor and praise to the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. My name is Yisrael, of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This is part 2 of the presentation called From Avaris to Alabama, Evidence of the Hebrews. And I wanted to start on the particular PowerPoint where we left off at. All right? What are they talking about? It seems to be the interest of some to try to deny the people of Israel existed. Such, however, is shown to be inaccurate. Next, we will get into the fact of what happened in part to the Israelites when they left the land of Israel from the era of the 9th century BCE until the time of the Great Enslavement. All right? So what we're going to present right now, brothers and sisters, as in other times, is for edification purposes. Giving honor and praise to the Creator. Next slide. The Bible is history. There is also evidence that many of those time-honored allies, the Canaanites / Phoenician inhabitants of Tyre, were forced around the same time to quit their city. They moved all the way across the Mediterranean to found Carthage in what is now Tunisia. And that came from a book called The Bible is History by Ian Wilson. Hebrewisms of West Africa, written by Joseph Williams, states the following. Sir Harry Johnston is of the opinion that the Phoenicians were a Semitic tribe, closely allied to the Hebrew stock. Again, the scriptures indicate that certain tribes of Asher and Zebulun lived in Carthage ever since the founding of the city. In Africa, the first Jewish graveyards to be noted are those of Carthage, in which Jewish catacombs are recognized. Of all the Jewish colonies in Africa, the most flourishing was probably that of Carthage. Now, that right there came from a source called Hebrewisms of West Africa, which was written before 1950. I emphasize on that point because since the era of the 50s, then going into the 60s, they try to sit there and make history seem boring to people. All right, so this is just something we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. The tribes and Phoenician. All right. Now, what you're looking at right here is Ephraim, Manasseh, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, Dan, and Tyre over here where the arrow is on the left-hand side, right? And then you see here Phoenicia. Phoenicia is right next to where the tribe of Asher is located, not too far from Tyre itself. So, brothers and sisters, when we see that Hebrewisms of West Africa is saying that again, inscriptions indicate that certain tribes of Asher and Zebulun lived in Carthage. Let's see, this is where Zebulun was. This is where Asher was. The Phoenicians came from this particular area as shown on this particular map. All right, now this is a map of the same land, just showing the different peoples that lived in that particular land. So this is just something we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. Carthage map. Carthage, the Carthaginians were Semites, akin in blood and features to the ancient Jews. Their language now and then struck a Hebrew note, as when they called the chief magistrate shofet, which means judges. The Hebrew root word shafat means to judge. All right, so if you're looking at this right here carefully, brothers and sisters, right? There's the Mediterranean, and here's Tunisia. Here's Libya. And if you keep on going east, that's Egypt, then the Sinai, and then going north, you see where the land of Israel was. But this is where Carthage was, in Tunisia. All right, this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Let's go back up and emphasize on something. It says, of all the Jewish colonies in Africa, the most flourishing was probably that of Carthage. Why does that become important? Because in the era, brothers and sisters, of the 2nd century BCE, you had the people that was the Carthaginians, all right, as well as the people of Rome at war one with another in what they call the Punic Wars. All right, so this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Let's go on, if you will, to the next slide. The traders of Solomon. They were a nation of seamen and traders, and they had to import the food. For this food they paid either with the produce of their own artists and handcraftsmen, with timber, or work in bronze and iron, or with rich purple dyes, or with merchandise. They traveled very far. They made great discoveries. They went as far south as the Cape of Good Hope, certainly as far as Sierra Leone, and as north as Britain. What are we going into in this particular regard? Brothers and sisters, what I just cited came from a book called The Phoenicians. Now, when this video is uploaded, I'm going to cite the author of said book, so that way we can cite our sources properly. All right? But right here, it distinctly says concerning the traders of Solomon that they were seamen and traders and they had to import the food. All right? They made great discoveries. They went as far south as Cape of Good Hope, which is in Africa, certainly as far as Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is in West Africa, and as far north as Britain. So the traders of Solomon didn't view going into Africa as a horrible thing. So this is just something we want to point out, brothers and sisters, and show the light of ancient Israel from different references. Next slide. Ezekiel 27. The inhabitants of Zidon and Arvad were thy mariners, the ancients of Gebal. They of Persia and Lud and of Phut were in thy army. Judah in the land of Israel were thy merchants. Dan also in Javan, going to and fro, occupied by thy fears. Bright iron, cassia, and calamus were in thy market. Dedan was thy merchant in precious clothes for chariots. So what are we reading in Ezekiel 27 is in regards, brothers and sisters, to the people of Tyre, all right, or the people of the Tyrian people. Zidon is part of the Canaanite people, all right, and what does it say? Judah and the land of Israel were thy merchants. So, brothers and sisters, when we go back here, when we see the source about the traders of Solomon, it says what? For this food they paid either with the produce of their own artists and craftsmen. So the merchants, the trading going back and forth is noted in the Bible as well as secular sources between the Israelites and the other nations. All right. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. It says Judah in the land of Israel, Dan also in Javan, going to and fro. Dan is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And Javan, brothers and sisters, is the Greek people. And this is why when you read about certain things about the Ionians, who were the ancient Greeks, and the people with Sparta in history, many people are leading to saying that the movie 300 that you see of in Hollywood was actually depicting ancient Danites. So this is just something we just want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide, please. The matter of the purple and the Tyrians with the Israelites. Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 7. Of fine linen with richly woven work from Egypt was thy sale, that it might be to thee for an ensign. Blue and purple from the Isles of Elisha was thine awning. Ezekiel chapter 27, verse 16. Aram was thy merchant, by reason of the multitude of thy wealth. They traded for thy wares with carbuncles, purple, and richly woven work, and fine linen, and coral and rubies. Now, as has been pointed out in other presentations, you will find out that the word Phoenician is the Greek word for purple. And as we see, purple is mentioned as far as what the trading was done 2 times in Ezekiel 27. So let's go on to the next slide. Carthage, according to Durant. Now, this is real Durant, all right? Her settlement was called Hadast, new town. The Greeks transformed the name into Carthedon, the Romans into Carthago. The Latins gave the name Africa to the region around Carthage and Utica and followed the Greeks in calling its Semitic population Poeni, however it's pronounced, pardon. Example, Phoenicians. The sieges of Tyre by Shalmaneser, Nebuchadnezzar, and Alexander brought many wealthy Tyrians to Africa. What are we pointing out in this particular regard, citing Will Durant in his book, right? We're saying this. The Greeks transformed the name into Carthedon. Now, I want to emphasize something right here, all right? Where it says, the Latins gave the name Africa to the region around Carthage and Utica. Gave the name Africa. Africa is not an indigenous name to the people of that indigenous place. The indigenous people that's in a continent called Africa did not call it Africa. So this is just something we want to point out for edification purposes. All right. So now it says the sieges of Tyre by Shalmaneser of Assyria, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and Alexander of Greece brought many wealthy Tyrians to Africa. So going into Africa was not a problem for the people of Tyre. Now let's go back to this map that we went here before, right? Tyre, as you begin to see, is right here where the arrow is. Now it's shown on this map on the left-hand side here. Asher and Zebulun. What I'm attempting to do, showing the references, is how the Israelites were part of the Phoenicians that wound up going over to the land of Carthage. So this is just something, brothers and sisters, we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. Zephaniah, era of Josiah of Yahuda. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. Let's go down, brothers and sisters, into verse 13. The remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity, nor speak lies, neither shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth. For they shall feed and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. Sing, O daughter of Zion, shout, O Israel. Be glad and rejoice with all the heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. So the point, brothers and sisters, in going over that particular aspect is to show that the children of Israel, according to the prophet Zephaniah, right? This is during the era of Josiah, who reigned in the tribe of Judah. This is, brothers and sisters, Josiah, may he rest in peace, was assassinated in the 7th century BCE. In the 7th century BCE. So what does it say? From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring my offering. The remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity, nor speak lies, neither shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, we done read, brothers and sisters, where it says beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Here we see Lake Tana, the Blue Nile River, the White Nile. All right, starting in Kenya, Lake Victoria is its foundation, and then the White Nile goes up, and then you have the Lake Tana, the other part of the Nile that's going up. You got the White Nile and the Blue Nile, and they meet in Sudan, and it keeps on going up. The Bible we just read here says from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. So when we see the rivers here in Ethiopia, beyond that would have to mean that you're going west. Next slide. Now here's a map from the book Hebrewisms of West Africa, all right, in part showing the diaspora of the Israelites, all right, from Jerusalem through Egypt, Elephantine, which we spoke about in part 1, then going here into the Sudan, going over here, then going west. All right, we already spoke about the references from Dr. Clark and Dr. Ben, who also spoke about the diaspora of the Israelites. Next slide. The book speaks Isaiah chapter 11. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros and from Cush and from Elam and from Shinar and from Hamath and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So, brothers and sisters, this right here is something we just want to point out for edification purposes, if we will. All right? The Most High will set his hand again a second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left. Now, one of the places it mentions to highlight, all right, it says Cush. Let's emphasize the remnant of his people, the Israelites, that are from Cush. Let's go back to the book of Zephaniah. Zephaniah chapter 3:13. The remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity. So we see yet again, we see again the aspect of the remnant of Israel. And this part says what? From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. So when we speak, brothers and sisters, about, and now citing in Isaiah chapter 11, and from Cush is Ethiopia. So let's understand that there were Israelites that were scattered there. The Bible in main cases shows you and tells you where the Israelites did go. Next slide. The book speaks, Ezekiel chapter 11. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, thy brethren, even thy brethren, the men of thy kindred and all the house of Israel, holy are they, unto whom the inhabitants of Jerusalem have said, Get you far from the Most High. Unto us is this land given in possession. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, although I have cast them far off among the heathen, and although I have scattered them among the countries, yet will I be to them as a little sanctuary in the countries where they shall come. That is why we don't teach that we can't keep none of the holy days in captivity, because right here it distinctly says that the Most High will be a little sanctuary into the places where Israel will come. Therefore say, thus saith the Lord God, I will even gather you from the people and assemble you out of the countries where you have been scattered, and I will give you the land of Israel. Brothers and sisters, the terminology land of Israel is in the Bible. All right, so it's not just saying that Israel was just a people or a man, but there was, in biblical terminologies, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. This is important for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. All right? Although I have scattered them among the countries, the 12 tribes of Israel were scattered among the countries. There are people promoting videos and teaching that only the southern kingdom was scattered and the northern kingdom wasn't. But brothers and sisters, such is not the case. Let's go on to the next slide. Respect to my teacher, Kohen Mikael. In his book, Israelites and Jews, The Significant Difference, Kohen Mikael said the following. The historian Philo stated that 1 million Hebrews resided from Libya and Egypt, from the Catabasmos to the border of Ethiopia. The Catabasmos is in modern-day Libya. All right? Respect to my teacher, Kohen Mikael. In the same book, we see the Greek historian and geographer Strabo wrote concerning the Hebrews of Cyrene. Now, these Hebrews already got into all cities, and it is hard to find a place, any habitable earth that has not admitted this tribe of men and is not possessed by it. So the Israelites were noted by going into places such as Cyrene. Cyrene, brothers and sisters, is in Libya. All right? So this is something we want to point out. And remember this PowerPoint for when we get into a subject later. Next slide. Respect to my teacher, Kohen Mikael. In the same book we read, when the Greeks and Romans invaded the East, the Edomites migrated into Europe and assimilated with other cultures, carrying their acquired Israelite traits with them. Next slide. Will Durant, in his book, by 70 AD, there were thousands of Jews in Seleucia on the Tigris and in other Parthian cities. They were numerous in Arabia and crossed thence into Ethiopia. They abounded in Syria and Phoenicia. In the west, there were Jewish communities in Carthage, Syracuse, Puteoli, correct me if I'm wrong about that pronunciation, Capua, Pompeii, and Rome. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. It says they, speaking of the Jews, the Israelites, they were numerous in Arabia, such as when you go into the book From Babylon to Timbuktu by Root of Windsor, he spoke about the aspect of the people in Yathrib, which is in Saudi Arabia, and crossed thence into Ethiopia. So they crossed thence into Ethiopia. Let's go on. The Lost Jews by Louis Rappaport. He says this, the Sabbatean is a key element to the mystery surrounding the Falasha's origins. Find the Sabbatean and you will find the lost tribes of Israel according to legend. The river has been placed in America, China, Syria, and many other countries. Next slide. The Jerusalem Chronicle matter. In 1994 to 1996, the Jerusalem Chronicle, based out of Mississippi, addressed the matter of the Beta Yisrael in Ethiopia and stated that many of the elders are regretting going to Israel under the European Jews due to the colorism that is displayed there. It says in quotes, for 10 years they have told us that our immigration was successful. It was a lie, says Adisa Musala, one from the Ethiopian Hebrew community, Jerusalem Chronicle 1996. So I just wanted to point that out for edification purposes. Next slide. The Jerusalem Chronicle matter. The man that you see there on the left-hand side is Adisu Masala. All right? Jerusalem Chronicle, 1996. This is the article, or should I say the cover of the paper that I just cited from. All right? This is dated as stated to 1996. Brothers and sisters, it is now currently the year 2018. So now we're talking 22 years ago, brothers and sisters. And I still happen to have that newspaper from 22 years ago. Within 22 years, a baby could be born and become a parent. Why am I emphasizing that? Because when you are seen, brothers and sisters, as a more, as a teacher, you have to, and it's not that I know everything, you have to stack your references and your information up. I come from a line of teachers. Kohen Mikael, Chief Simeon, More Yosef, Adonisha, Kohen Lewi. You understand? I come from a line of teachers, so me having sat under these teachers, I have no problem being able to sit there and address certain things in certain ways. All right? Let's go on to the next slide. The Jerusalem Chronicle matter and the pictures of the Beta Israel. Now, looking at this on the right-hand side are two members who appear to be children from the Beta Israel, so-called Phoenicians that were in Ethiopia. All right? Looking at here on the left-hand side, it says, stand up for your rights. Then in the Hebrew, as you see over here, let's get into this. This part where you see the arrow, it says Shakor equals Laban, which means, for whatever they mean, that black equals white. What are they protesting is, as stated, the colorism that's currently going on in the land of Israel. All right, so this is just something we want to point out, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. All right, just as you see our people protesting and everything in the United States, so do you see the house of Israel protesting inside of the land of Israel itself. Of course, you know, you got some like here and over here who may not be of the true house of Israel, but nonetheless, what we're pointing out is that as the protests are done over here, so is it done there. And as you see there, stand up for your rights. Sound like the Negroes or the African Americans, don't it? Next slide. The Jerusalem Chronicle and the matter of the pictures of BI, meaning Black Israelites. All right? The Lost Jews. This is a book that I cited earlier by Louis Rappaport, right? And what you're looking at right there on the right-hand side, the Prime Minister of Israel with some of the leaders from the Beta Israel. Now, looking at this picture right here, I do want to give a due respect to a teacher of mine, as I've done in the past, Chief Naphtali. Because when I saw this, this person right here essentially kind of reminds me of the man. All right, so this is just something I want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide, please. History of Ancient Israel by Michael Grant. Herod made his way to Rome, where he met with Antony. Antony prompted the Roman governor to make a treaty with Herod and sent him back to Judea not as a prince but as a king. This meant that the Hasmonean dynasty had been brought to an end in favor of an Idumean house of unwelcome race and recent conversion. The Romans gave Herod this job. What are we pointing out, brothers and sisters, is that the Romans were friends with the Edomites. So when Herod was sent back to the land where the Israelites was at, not as a prince, but as a king, the Hasmonean dynasty, which came up after the Maccabean era, had been brought to an end in favor of an Idumean, which is Edomite, house of unwelcome race and recent conversion. It was actually John Hyrcanus that had the people convert that were Edomites to the ways of being Israel, as the book of Josephus points out. Next slide. Herod continued. The deaths of Cleopatra and Antony made it necessary for Herod to protest loyalty to the victorious leader, later known as Augustus, who was also known as Octavian. Instead, when Herod died, Augustus divided his state between 3 of his sons. Archelaus was the person given control and rule over Judea. Next slide. History of Israel by Michael Grant cited again. After urging surrender in vain, Titus pushed on with the siege. He succeeded in capturing the temple, which was consumed in flames. It should be noted that this temple destroyed was the temple that Ezra and them built in the time of the Persian rule. Anyone able to claim connection with the house of David was hunted down and eliminated. So this is something we want to point out, brothers and sisters. Anyone able to claim connection with the house of David was hunted down and eliminated. That's coming from the book by Michael Grant. Anyone able to claim connection with the house of David was hunted down and eliminated. Next slide. No, matter of fact, let's go back up here. So if the Romans was about eliminating the house of David, can we please explain to the people who this gentleman is? Who's this guy where the arrow is? Are they trying to sit there and claim and find what the Romans attempted to destroy? Or are these people where the arrow is dressed in Eastern garments, part of the Israelites that dispersed when the Romans came in? Let's go on to the next part, if we will. All right? An explanation. It is obvious that we know of the onslaughts from the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, such as the mother and her sons murdered for not eating pork. We read of the situation with the Romans and the Israelites starving to where they ate leather for food. Here is my question. Do the white Jews look for the family of Hadrian, the family of Antiochus, the family of Trajan, the family of Caligula, and hold them on trial for past war crimes as they do to old Nazis? There was a man, brothers and sisters, in his 90s that was found out to be a Nazi. Don't you know they had him incarcerated for 4 years? You can look that up. Old Nazi in prison for war crimes. If the Jewish people are known to be that vindictive to do that to somebody in their 90s, why are they not in the land of Israel looking to persecute those and to get vengeance on the Greeks and the Romans for what they did? It is because the European Jews are not the ancient Israelites. So they don't feel that connection. It's just as much as when black people talk about slavery and white people be like, what's wrong? Get over it. You're not the victim or the descendant of the victim. So therefore, you can't feel the pain that the other one is talking about. Next slide. An explanation. They do not hold them on trial because the feeling of nationalism does not flow in the Jewish people concerning the house of Israel, because they are not the house of Israel. They are, according to Stephen Jacobs, a white Jewish man himself, who wrote a book called Hebrew Heritage of Black Africa. He said that the Jewish people are descendants of the Romans, Turkish, Armenian, and other Caucasian groups who adopted over the course of centuries, meaning that they adopted the ways of Israel over the course of centuries. Let's go back, brothers and sisters, to here. Michael Grant in his book, History of Ancient Israel. The Hasmonean dynasty, having come to an end, had been brought to an end in favor of an Idumean house of unwelcome race. So the Edomites were the first people before the other Japhetic nations came in there perpetrating a fraud as far as being the house of Israel. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Deuteronomy 28, verse 43 to verse 44. The stranger that is in the midst of thee shall get above thee higher and higher, and thou shalt come down lower and lower. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. Next slide. International Jew by Henry Ford. This is a book you can pick up online. The music industry, the cotton, here we go, oil, steel, magazine authorship, meat packing industry, the liquor business, the loan business are in control of Jews of the United States. Brothers and sisters, in the description of this video, I'm going to sit there and show a video about the evidence of the European Jews as far as them being involved in the Atlantic slave trade. All right, so this is just something we want to point out for edification purposes. The Jewish people, according to Henry Ford, and he was the one who helped make the automobile, all right, look him up in history, okay? He wrote a book called International Jew as well as a book called The Dearborn Independent. And in this particular book called The International Jew, he is stating that the European Jews own the music industry, the cotton, oil, steel, magazine authorship, the meat packing industry. Do they deal with pork? Who knows? The liquor business. So when you see wine and spirits in the liquor store in the black community, we can begin to see who's in charge of that. The loan business. They the ones who operate Chase Bank. They the ones who operate Citibank. And this is not hating on them for their quote unquote success. This is just letting it be known for edification purposes. Because the Israelites are under this. The stranger that is in the midst of thee shall get above thee higher and higher, and thou shalt come down lower and lower. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and thou shalt be the tail. So the Jewish man owning the loan business, he is disqualified from being under the predicament of the true house of Israel. Next slide. Brothers and sisters, giving honor and praise unto the Most High, the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth. Weheshibkaya Mizraim ba'aniyot. Baderek asha amorti laka lo tosif o lirota. Wahit makar tim sham la oibeka. La abadin wa lish fachot wa inquone. Next slide. Forward. Regarding the remaining slides, not for youth. Shalom. The remaining slides will show graphic images of slavery and the time of post-slavery, from injuries to death. It is encouraged that for youth, this may be at the parents' or guardian's discretion if one wants a child to see such. Let's continue. What am I saying? At this point of the presentation, brothers and sisters, I will suggest that the parents, the guardians, the adults, for certain, do not watch this at first with your children, about what we're going to get into. You may want to watch it yourself, and then it's up to you if you deem it suitable for the eyes of children. That's how real this particular thing goes. Let's go on to the next slide. Deuteronomy 28, verse 65. And among these nations thou shalt have no repose, and there shall be no rest for the sole of your foot. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and languishing of soul. Brothers and sisters, this right here is in part what it's talking about. No rest for the sole of your foot. An image and picture of Harriet Tubman with her gun, taking the people going north, escaping slavery. But you shall have a trembling heart. Look at this. These people, even in the picture, don't even look like they are at peace. And failing of eyes and languishing of soul. Do not, and I'm going to say this in no disrespect, I refuse, I do not want anybody to try to transform the history of the said black people with Native Americans. Why? Because the Cherokee people, and I have Cherokee in my family, but the Cherokee in my family is not thinking about the black dude that's on the video right here. So our people always trying to, it seems, well, I have my great-great-grand was Cherokee, and my great-great-grand's friend aunt was Seminole. And I'm not saying, brothers and sisters, that there were no people of color or black people inside of the Western Hemisphere prior to the Atlantic slave trade. I'm not saying that there were no black people that were among the Native Americans. But the recent so-called consciousness that many of our people are into is basically trying to say, forget all of this. We're going to keep the language clean, all right? Forget all of this, and let's just sit there and claim sovereignty inside the United States, the Western Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere that produces nothing like that continent of Africa is able to produce. Let's go on to the next slide. Over 50 years of assaults. What you're looking at right here is black people in the 1960s being hosed down from a march or so. And what you're looking at right here, all right, are images of black men that were lynched, as it says there, in 2018. 2 young black men lynched in Oklahoma by 4 whites, and it's getting no media attention. See, this is why I'm saying that this may not be suitable at first for children. I'm asking the parents, or the guardians or the adults for certain, you may want to watch this on your own because it may not be the most comfortable. Viewer discretion is advised, as the saying goes, because this is the kind of stuff that we're going to be getting into in this particular regard. Next slide. And the Lord shall bring thee back into Egypt in ships, by the way whereof I said unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there you shall sell yourselves unto your enemies, for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Conjuncture joins clauses or sentences or words. This means we have to read before verse 68 to get an understanding. Because Deuteronomy 28, verse 68 starts off with the word and. So we have to read before that to see what it's talking about. All right? Deuteronomy 28, verse 67. In the morning thou shalt say, would it were even, and at even thou shalt say, would it were morning, for the fear of thy heart which thou shalt fear, and for the sight of thine eyes which thou shalt see. In the morning, you want it to be even, and at even, you want it to be morning. Why? Because of the fear of thy heart which thou shalt fear. A trembling heart, sorrow of mind, languishing of soul. You can certainly believe and know and understand that these people wished at times that it was day, and at times they wished that it was even, because there's no rest for the sole of their foot. Let's go on to the next slide. Deuteronomy 28, verse 58 to verse 59. If thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that thou mayest fear this glorious and awful name, Yah Elohim, then the Most High will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continuance, and sore sicknesses, and of long continuance. Brothers and sisters, the plagues of the seed. Brothers and sisters, the seed is the future, it's the youth. What are we saying about what's going on with the youth? Because SS Magazine pointed out back in the 1980s, namely 1982, if I stand to be corrected, that our youth are in trouble. The plagues of the seed are worrying about where to get sex from, worried about the new thing to come out on the market. The plagues of the seed is standing online 2 hours for a pair of sneakers, but have no time to buy a book. The plague of the seed, brothers and sisters, is being comfortable shooting one another and killing one another, harming one another, getting a kick and making it as if it's a sport to do evil one to another. That's the plague of the seed, even great plagues and of long continuance. So when the people sit back and analyze, why are the black youth just like that? Brothers and sisters, less than 15 years ago in Newark, New Jersey, on the course of one weekend, there was 11 brothers that were shot in one weekend in Newark, New Jersey. When March 5th came, which happens to be on the Gregorian calendar, my B-Day, I had turned 38, giving thanks to the Most High. I was waiting for the sister that I'm courting with for her to pull up. And I was at Newark Penn Station in New Jersey. And this dude, I'm not going to mention the exact words because I'm not going to try to use profanity, but he essentially was telling somebody, hey, yo, I'm about to such and such this N-word up here, up. And he walked down the block, apparently perhaps maybe to go and get his gat burner, his gun, if you will, to try to sit there and execute or harm another black man. These are the things that have been prolonged of long continuance. I remember, may she rest in peace, my mother telling me how bad it was at Fort Greene, how bad it in Brooklyn, how bad it was when you go by Junior's over by the 3 train in that particular area going toward East New York, and how wicked that area was when she was in her teens and 20s. Brothers and sisters, when you watch, for instance, the movie Colors going back to 1988, which is 30 years ago, and you still got gangs like that today, and of long continuance and sore sicknesses, because you have to be sick to want to sit there and harm your own people and not want to help your brother and sister. You must be sick to not want to sit there and deal righteously one with another. And this happens if it says, if you will not do all the words of this law that are written in this book, which is the Torah. This is why we have no problem being called Torah-centered. Or Israel is supposed to be Torah-centered. If Israel is not centered on the Torah, then what are you centered on? Because Deuteronomy chapter 30 says the Torah is your life. So if you're not centered upon the book, and namely the part of the book that says this is your life, what are you centered in? What is the judgment that you're calling upon? That thou mayest fear this glorious and awful name, the Lord thy God. Then the Lord will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continuance. The plagues of the seed, great and long continuance, and plagues and sore sicknesses. Brothers and sisters, you have one generation that was doing wickedness. There was a principal, may he rest in peace, by the name of Patrick Daly, who in the 1990s was trying to lead a student home after a fight in Red Hook, Brooklyn, was shot and killed. They killed the principal of the school. You understand? And so that being in 1992, 1993, you have it to where now there are people still doing aspects of shooting the guns. Because see, where the principal got shot wasn't inside the school. He was trying to lead somebody home. There are people that I know of that were in junior high that used to sit there and bring the guns inside their book bag. You understand? That's a problem, brothers and sisters. See, what I'm presenting cannot be said as a thing of, well, it's a smoke screen, or it's a false flag, or it's not real, or it's a diversion. This is the reality. This is not a false flag. This is not a diversion. Next slide. Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 45. And all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou didst not hearken unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded thee. If you will not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, to keep his commandments and his statutes, the solution for us, brothers and sisters, is to return back to the laws of the Most High. Don't you see Christianity teaching almost on every other block in the hood or in the ghetto, if you will, that the Old Testament law is done away with? And don't you see us getting shot up every Friday night and Saturday morning? Every Saturday night? Making the funeral arrangements on Sunday morning? Don't you see this happening while they continuously teach you don't have to keep the commandments? Don't you see the connection with that? Let's go on to the next slide. Death of a brother by a brother. What you're looking at here is depicted in the 1991 film Boys in the Hood, showing the reality. Now, I don't know if this is supposed to represent a red hat with a red car at the Bloods. I'm not sure. But the point I'm saying is, if you're looking at this, you see him with the double barrel shooting the guy known as Ricky in this particular regard. And here's the car right there. So it's showing from both angles. All right. This is something we want to point out for edification purposes. So when it says your life shall hang in doubt before you, it's not too hard to figure out what it's talking about. It says, and you shall fear day and night and shall have no assurance of your life. So at nighttime, for instance, in that movie Boys in the Hood, when the beef or the static or the drama, all right, that happened in that particular movie, it was at night between the guy that you see shot there and the guy on the left-hand side's friend. What are you looking at? And all of that kind of stuff. That was at night. Then you see at day, when they see them pulling up in a car, it says, oh man, we got to sit there and run. You understand? This is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Death of a brother by a brother. The plagues of your seed. This is being depicted in 1991. Don't you know that our people are still shooting each other and killing each other and murdering each other? Don't you know that movie, Boys in the Hood, being depicted in 1991? In 2003, the New York Post reported that the Bronx, before the year was out, already had over 300 murders. So these are things we want to talk about and emphasize for edification purposes. All right, next slide. The verbs of Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee back into Egypt in ships, by the way whereof I said unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there you shall sell yourselves unto your enemies, for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Weheshib ka ya mizrahim ba'aniyot, baderek asher amorati la ka lo tosim o lir ota, wahit makaratim sham la oibeka la abadin walis fa kot wa in quone. All of the parts that you see that's highlighted in the dark black, or should I say highlighted in black, all right, are all verbs. Next slide. Seen from movies, get the picture. Now I want to go over this particular aspect, because see here we went over Boys in the Hood, right? And that movie came out in 1991. Here on the left-hand side is a movie called Paid in Full. Now this person here was supposed to represent a drug dealer, and this person here sitting in the passenger side is supposed to represent an upcoming drug dealer in the black community. Now, what we're looking at on the left-hand side comes from a movie, and let's see what they have to say about drugs and the black people.
I also don't believe in drugs. For years, I paid my people extra so they wouldn't do that kind of business. Somebody comes to them and says, I have powders. If you put up $3,000, $4,000 investment, we can make $50,000 distributing. So they can't resist. I want to control it as a business, to keep it respectable. I don't want it near schools. I don't want it sold to children. That's an infamia. In my city, we would keep the traffic in the dark, people to college. They're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls. Business, to keep it respectable. I don't want it near schools. I don't want it sold to children. That's an infamia. In my city, we would keep the traffic in the dark, people to college. They're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls.
This is from the movie Godfather Part 1, which came out in the 1970s. So they are there having a meeting among their own gangsters and everything like that. And this has been pointed out that he's saying that keep the drugs among the darkies, the color people, because they're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls. That's what was just stated in that particular clip right there. So now when we see in the 1980s depiction of Mitch and Ace, all right, about him and what he's having in his hearing right here is part drugs, cocaine. So let's see the plan that they had in regards with our people in this movie in the 70s.
I also don't believe in drugs. For years, I paid my people extra so they wouldn't do that kind of business. Somebody comes to them and says, I have powders. If you put up $3,000, $4,000 investment, we can make $50,000 distributing. So they can't resist. I want to control it as a business, to keep it respectable. I don't want it near schools. I don't want it sold to children. That's an infamia. In my city, we would keep the traffic in the dark, people to college. They're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls. That's an infamia. In my city, we would keep the traffic in the dark, people to college. They're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls.
So when we're looking at this right here, brothers and sisters, the guy is saying in this movie here, this is Godfather Part 1, that the dark people, they're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls. All right? They're going to keep the drugs in the black community because he doesn't believe in it for the white people in their community. So now when we see our people feeling succumb to have to sit there and sell that powder, if you will, in order to sit there and make a living, we know what it means when it says, in the morning you shall say you wish it was even, and at even you shall say you wish it was morning. Because, and one of the things that they pointed out in one of those quote-unquote hood DVDs It's called The Life of Alpo. Alpo was one of the biggest drug dealers that came out of New York. And I want to quote what the guy said, and pardon me if I misquote the man. It says that we have no way of looking up to the nigga that was working. The nigga that was working was struggling. That's what the guy essentially was saying. Pardon my language, but I wanted to quote what the man said. The nigga that was working was struggling. So it's better off to sit there and sell this kind of substance to your people in order to get the rims. And as was pointed out in this movie right here, it's not about the money. It's about having sex with those skeezers right there. We're not going to say exactly the words that the guy said in the movie. It's about not dressing like a nigga like you. That is the scene that was in that particular movie and paid in full. So when we begin to see the long continuances of the sicknesses on our people, this is not a satire. This is not a false flag. All right? So these are things that we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide.
I also don't believe in drugs. For years, I paid my people extra so they wouldn't do that kind of business. Somebody comes to them and says, I have powders. If you put up $3,000, $4,000 investment, we can make $50,000 distributing. So they can't resist. I want to control it as a business, to keep it respectable. I don't want it near schools. I don't want it sold to children. That's an infamia. In my city, we would keep the traffic in the dark, people, the colored. They're animals anyway, so let them lose their souls.
The explanation of the verbs. Heshib. The word heshib from shab. Shab means en route to return. The word heshib means to restore. 201 Hebrew verbs. Tosif. The word tosif from yasaf. Yasaf means en route to add. The word tosif means to add or to increase. The explanation of the verbs, part 2. Lir'ot. Lir'otah. Lir'ot. The infinitive meaning to see, coming from the root word ra'ah. Lir'otah. To see it, to see her. What is it? The captivity. Hit makartem. A verb of the hipa'el stem meaning to sell oneself or to devote oneself. Source, 501 Hebrew verbs. The root of such word is the word makar, meaning to sell. The explanation of the verbs, part 3. Quone, from the root word quana, meaning to buy. Many say the Israelites are incorrect when we say that quana also means to redeem, citing that the word ga'al, as well as pada, means to redeem. Yet we see an example in the book of Nehemiah, cited in my book also. The dark part, highlighted, anachnu quaninu, we redeemed. Quaninu, the root word of that being quana. The word quana means to redeem. Next slide. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and Deuteronomy chapter 4. I am the Lord thy God who brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Deuteronomy chapter 4. But you hath the Lord taken and brought forth out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be unto him a people of inheritance, as ye are this day. Brothers and sisters, what is the point? Egypt out of the house of bondage. Egypt out of the house of bondage. Brought forth out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt. So we see that Mizraim depiction in the scriptures, the house of bondage as well as the iron furnace. Now the word Mizraim is what we're going to focus on in this particular regard. Hebrew Lexicon, page 651. Zarar, to tie or bind up. You see it highlighted in the yellow on the left-hand side. To shut up, to be hostile to. Adversary, to be straitened or distressed. Then on the right-hand side, the root of zarar being zar, straight, narrow, adversary, enemy, distress or adversity. So this is something we want to point out. The word zar and then the word zarar. both meaning distress or adversary. In part, next slide. Hebrew Dictionary, page 261. The word zar, to besiege, to bind, to wrap, to form, to persecute. Zar or zarim, adversary or distress. We are in the scriptures in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 6. And it says the following. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 6. And it says the following. The burden of the beasts of the south into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence cometh the young and old lion, the viper and the fiery serpent. They will carry their riches upon the shoulders of young asses, and their treasures upon the bunches of camels, to a people that shall not profit them. For the Egyptians shall help in vain, and to no purpose. Therefore have I cried concerning this. Their strength is to sit still. Brothers and sisters, in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 6, the part that says trouble in Hebrew is the word zara. Eretz Zara, the land of trouble. Zar means adversary or enemy as shown. So when you add a mem as the prefix to that, you get the word ma'zor or me'zor or ma'zir. Next slide. Jeremiah in the matter. Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I will turn back the weapons of war that are in your hands, wherewith ye fight against the king of Babylon, and against the Chaldeans that besiege you without the walls, and I will gather them into the midst of this city. Ko amar Yah Elohei Yisrael. Hini meseb et kele hamilchama. Asher beyedkem. Asher atem nilkamim bam. Et melech Babel. Et Hakasdim, Hazarim Alekem, that besiege, Hazarim, Zadeh Resh, Zadeh Resh, to besiege, Hazarim, that Ha represents that or who besiege or that besiege, Hazarim, because it's Kasdim, you get Zarim, because the verb agrees with the aspect of the noun in when you show the conjugation. What is the point? Zar, Zara, Zarim, Zarot. To besiege, to be adverse to be an adversary to. From Egypt and Africa to Israel and Africa. So let's look. You got Egypt, which is over here. This is the Sinai Peninsula, the brook of Egypt, as you see there. And going up in there is where the land of Israel, formerly known as Canaan, is. And here we see where the land of Canaan is. Remember Tyre that we spoke about earlier? We see her again right here. And then you see the Nile River. This is Egypt. See? So one way is going this way. Actually going that way, sorry. On this right-hand side, we see the going that way. And on the left-hand side, we see it going into Egypt. And on the right-hand side, out of Egypt. See how the people traveled back and forth? So Egypt by ships in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, was not even talking about the aspect of what happened with the sea peoples. It was not talking about the aspect that happened with Titus, and we'll explain that as we go along. The Greek Empire and the Seleucids. All right, what you're looking at here is a map of the ancient Greek Empire. All right, you see Egypt there, Arabia there, and this is the predominant part where the Greeks had rule. All right, of Alexander the Great, even though he went as far as India. But in this particular map, we're just showing in this particular part right here. This is where the Israelites was at, in part. All right? Now, this is the Seleucids. He came after Alexander. All right? And we see all this area right here under the Seleucid control. So the Israelites, which we see right here, were under the Seleucid control. Let's go on to the next slide. What do scholars say? It was with the foundation of the Ptolemaic dynasty that its numbers began to increase rapidly, to make Egypt one of the major centers of the diaspora in the Hellenistic and Roman world, meaning the diaspora of the Israelites. All right, this is written by Smallwood, a book that you can get online. All right, I'll put the name of it in the description. Ptolemy the First overran Palestine 4 times between 320 and 301 BCE during the wars of the Diadochi and took home a large haul of Jewish prisoners, some to be employed on garrison duties and some to become slaves of his soldiers. Brothers and sisters, Ptolemy the First was before Ptolemy the Second. This is what we just read on the right-hand side. Can be confirmed when you go into the book of Josephus. Next slide. Important Romans in regards to the Israelites. Pompey, Julius Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Vespasian, and Titus, the star. Let's get into this. It is noted that Vespasian sent Israelites to Greece to work on Nero's canal. It is noted that Titus sent Israelites from Egypt to Rome as his triumph. The temple he destroyed in 70 AD was not the temple that Ezra built. That was Herod's temple. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Next slide. More about the Israelites and Romans. Smallwood states the following. The triumph in 71 AD or CE, all right, brought a huge consignment of Jewish prisoners to Rome for slavery, fewer than likely to have been deported to Rome at the end of the Bar Kokhba War. The Bar Kokhba matter ended in 135 AD, or some say CE. If after that there were Israelites sent to Rome as slaves, how can we say that the matter of Deuteronomy 28 ends with Titus taking people by ship in 70 or 71 AD? So this is something we want to point out. So with the Bar Kokhba matter that ended in 135 CE or AD, you had it to where, brothers and sisters, there would have been Israelites still sent to Rome as slaves by ship. So the point I'm emphasizing is the people who try to say that Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 in the Egypt and ships is culminated with the era of Titus, they are incorrect. Next slide. Titus on the matter. Pompey was the first, Tacitus on the matter. Pompey was the first Roman to subdue the Jews and set foot in the temple by right of conquest. Gaius Sosius, a Roman politician, subdued the Jews. Anthony gave the kingdom to Herod. Why did I bold type that and put that there? Because Anthony gave the kingdom to Herod, so the Edomites later on, part of the people of the Idumeans whom Herod belonged to, later on after his death, you have it to where Pompey already was doing what he was doing in the era before Herod. Then you had Herod. Then along with Herod, you had Mark Antony. All right, or Anthony, as you see here. This is what we want to point out because the Romans and the Edomites were in consignment together against the Israelites. Now, when Mark Antony, stated as Anthony there, lost to Octavian, Herod joined on with that particular guy, Octavian. The Emperor Claudius therefore made Judea a province to be governed by Roman knights and freedmen. One being Felix, Nero sent out Vespasian, who in turn left Titus to continue the siege of Jerusalem. Brothers and sisters, in the near future, I'm going to do a presentation called The Matter of the Romans and the Israelites, where I will go into the aspect of this more in depth. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you for your time. Tacitus and Titus. At the same time, it seemed advantageous to leave Titus at the head of the army to meet all the eventualities, whether good or bad. The number of those besieged, men and women of every age, is to have been 600,000. So what we're looking at right here is the Roman Empire, Northern Africa, part of all of Europe for the most part, and also where the children of Israel was at. And the Romans spoke of the Israelites as well. The Josephus matter. So this Fronto slew all those who had been seditious and robbers, who were impeached one by another, but of the young men he chose out of the tallest and most beautiful, and reserved them for the triumph. And as for the rest of the multitude that were above 17 years old, He put them in bonds and sent them to the Egyptian mines. Titus also sent a great number into the provinces as a present to them, that they might be destroyed upon their theaters by the sword and by the wild beasts. But those that were under 17 years old were sold as slaves. Brothers and sisters, the Romans were into raping men. We already know about the Roman plays in which boys were made to play the roles of women. So when you have a slave, as in the case that's been stated by Buchanan, who was the president before Lincoln, that he was a sad homosexual who had black men penetrated anally. You understand? When you look at the aspect of when you think somebody is your um slave or to be subjugated by you, you had a situation when the police at the train station on the J train line put the antenna to a walkie-talkie inside of a man's behind. You had it to where the police, namely not trying to play the race card, quote unquote, all the time, they were Italians, maybe descendants of the Romans themselves, where they were in part putting a plunger inside of an anus of a man named Abner Louima. Brothers and sisters, these things cannot be denied. So when you begin to see that in history with the Romans, who were Italians, all right, you had it to where by the sword and by the wild beast, but those that were under 17 years of age were sold as slaves. Who knows what happened to them? Remember, it says that all who were impeached one by another, but of the young men, he chose out of the tallest and most beautiful and reserved them for the triumph. Who knows what happened to those guys en route? Next slide. Josephus matter. Now at the same time that Titus Caesar lay at the siege of Jerusalem, did Vespasian go on board a merchant ship. It sailed from Alexandria to Rhodes, whence he sailed away in ships, with 3 rows of oars. And as he touched at several cities that lay in his road, he was joyfully received by them all, and so passed over Ionia into Greece, whence he set sail from Corcyra to the promontory of Lapix, whence he took his journey by land. Next slide. The Josephus matter. But as for Titus, he marched from that Caesarea, which lay at the seaside, and came to that which is named Caesarea Philippi, and stayed there a considerable time, and exhibited all sorts of shows there. And here a great number of the captives were destroyed, some being thrown to wild beasts, and others in multitudes, forced to kill one another as if they were their enemies. So when you go and see, for instance, the movie Django, when the black man was made to fight against one another, also in Django, when the black man was being torn apart by beasts, aka those dogs, the European was continuing the same thing that he was doing in ancient Rome to the Israelites, to the later on Israelites, our ancestors. All right? So I just wanted to show the map here where it says it lay here by the seaside and all of the places in which he traveled to and traveled through. All right? Next slide. Distance matter again. The distance from Caesarea to Caesarea Philippi is a little over 88 miles. Josephus, Book of the Wars of the Jews, Book 7, Chapter 2. While Titus was at Caesarea, he solemnized the birthday of his brother Domitian after a splendid manner, and inflicted a great deal of the punishment intended for the Jews in honor of him, for the number of those that were now slain in fighting with the beasts, and were burnt, and fought with one another, exceeded 2,500. So those that were burnt, those that were killed by fighting one another or being made to fight one another, and those that were killed by fighting the beast, that exceeded over 2,500. So when the birthdays of these people, they used to do things like put a man between 2 horses and then beat the horses and see someone ripped in half. That's part of the sport of the Romans. When you watch the movie Caligula, they give you an example of how they used to sit there and put a person's head just only in the ground and then have a sword come and chop off that person's head. And that was entertainment to the Romans. You understand? Let's go on, if we will, to the next slide. Titus burnt Hebrews and some others did too. So what we see right here hung, and then you see this postcard that was sent. This famous picture of a black man after he was lynched and shot, and then he was burnt. And they all standing around there in memorial of a black man's death. Brothers and sisters, the fact that they can do this says a whole lot about them. See, this is not a satire. This is not something that we're presenting to debate any other black people. We're presenting this to sit there and show the truth about our ancestors and what happened. You understand? Let's go on, if you will, to the next slide. Titus went by land until going to Rome. Josephus, Book of the Wars of the Jews, Book 7, chapter 5, verse 2 and 3. It lets us know that Titus began to go to Egypt and passed over the desert very suddenly, then took up resolution to go to Rome by sea. Point is this, many people saying that Titus of Rome would have taken the Israelites in ships from the land of Palestine into the land of Egypt because that would have been an easier way for them to do so. Yet the book of Josephus already spoke about Titus going over the desert very suddenly. Let's go on to the next slide. Oh, pardon me. Let's go on to the next part. Here, he, Titus, went from Syria to Antioch to the Euphrates, then back to Antioch while he was on his way to Egypt. So Titus took up his journey he intended into Egypt and passed over the desert very suddenly and came to Alexandria and took up resolution to go to Rome by sea. So you don't even see in the book of Josephus where it says that Titus went over by the aspect of going into the sea from the land of Palestine into Egypt. While they were already in Egypt after marching over the desert very suddenly, then they went to Italy by sea. Next slide. Map according to Hebrew thought, primitive thought. Now, when I say primitive, I mean like, let's say before the time of Jonah. This is the way the world was according to the way the ancient Israelites would have understood it, the average ancient Israelite. All right? The Lord will bring a nation against thee from far from the end of the earth, as the eagle swoopeth down, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand, a nation of fierce countenance, that shall not regard the person of the old, nor show favor to the young. So what we have to know and understand is that the eagle that swooped down came from another land. Next slide. From Rome to Jerusalem, from Greece to Jerusalem. Let's look, brothers and sisters. Here's Rome going over into Jerusalem. And here we see Greece going into Jerusalem. So you can go by sea, as many did, or by land, as some did. Next slide. Deuteronomy 28, verse 68. And the Lord shall send thee back into Egypt in ships, by the way which I said it to you. You shall never see it again. And there you shall be sold unto your enemies, for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Now I want to emphasize that in the Hebrew, we want to point out that it should be saying that you will sell yourselves to your enemies and no man will buy you. How are you selling yourself to your enemies? Can you help me? Can you hire? Is there anything I can get? I'm going to go and get these stamps. I'm going to go and have my social security number and my birth certificate because these are legal documents and I can sit there and use that. That is selling yourself over to your enemies and no one will buy you. You're still the oppressed. Our only solution is the Most High. Next slide. The slave trade. What Deuteronomy 28:68 is talking about. So we can gain understanding what we're talking about. Remember we went over in part 1 about the people already scattering? Well, this is what happened after they were scattered. In part, some migrated down here and went over here. Remember we talked about Solomon and the merchants earlier? Over here is where many archaeologists say is what they refer to as the gold of Ophir is at. It's not over here in Europe. All right? It's not over here in Europe. Solomon married the daughter of Egypt. Solomon, and I do lay claim to believe, if you will, the story about him and the Queen of Sheba. All right? I believe that many people don't want to talk about that because under the Christian dogma, Ethiopia was truly never conquered. Maybe a little bit colonized, but never truly conquered in that regard. You understand? What was Mussolini trying to get? And what was Hitler talking about getting? Because see, Hitler knew the Jews that he oppressed over here in Europe were not the real Jews. He knew that. You understand? The Bible, King James, I'm sure by the time of Hitler had already been translated into German. He knew that the Israelites already done scattered in certain places. The Apocrypha says that the Ark of the Covenant was taken by Jeremiah and hidden in Egypt. Some people say that the Ark of the Covenant went into Ethiopia. So one of the things that Mussolini is noted to have been wanting to get is different artifacts of the ancient world. Because see, Mussolini was an Italian, maybe perhaps related to the Romans. You remember seeing an Arch of Titus as presented in other documentations on my channel? Well, Mussolini apparently wanted to continue what Domitian was already doing. All right? So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. And here we see the people being transported out, and then over here being transported back and forth, and then quote unquote goods and cargo going back and forth there. So that was part of the Atlantic slave trade. To try to deny the Atlantic slave trade going west, brothers and sisters, when you had a company making slave ships in Liverpool in England, is frivolous. Next slide. Deuteronomy 28, the roar. The Lord shall smite thee with madness, and with blindness, and with astonishment of heart. And thou shalt grope at noonday, as the blind gropeth in darkness. And thou shalt not make thy ways prosperous. And thou shalt be only oppressed, and robbed away. And there shall be none to save thee. So we are robbed, underpaid, and overworked. And then paying more than the property is worth in food as well as in residence. Being made to have to pay to stand on transportation, being made to have to pay for water, being made to have to sit there and not get any grants, being denied certain things. We know what this is talking about. Well, there's white people who go through that too. But their ancestors wasn't brought over in ships after being scattered from their homeland. Because I know somebody's going to say there were Irish children, okay, that was kidnapped by the British and brought over to Barbados. But the scriptures in the Bible talk about the people being scattered prior to them being put in ships and sent into slavery. So the Irish children is not the fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28's prophecy, because they was being kidnapped in their own land of Ireland. So this is something we want to point out for edification purposes. Madness, crazy. We packed the mental institutions in the era from the 1920s to the 1960s. Blindness, blind to the history, culture, land, language of one's people. Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 11. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they, the Israelites, say, our bones are dried up, and our hope is lost. We are clean cut off. Meaning clean cut off from what? Cut off from your land, your language, your culture, your God, your woman, your husband, your children, your ancestors. We are clean cut off. That's what it's talking about. So the dry bones in Ezekiel 37 is the house of Israel. Next slide. And thou shalt grope at noonday, as the blind gropeth in darkness, and thou shalt not make thy ways prosperous. And thou shalt be only oppressed and robbed always, and there shall be none to save thee. Grope at noonday, grope, to search blindly with hands, with uncertainty. What are you doing? What goals do you have? Ain't bleep for a nigga here. You heard? This is some of the mentalities in that sicknesses and sore sicknesses upon thy seed that Deuteronomy 28 is talking about, brothers and sisters. Let's go on to the next slide. Deuteronomy 28, the roar. Clifford Hall will go to jail for 6 months for doing too much for his son, after overpaying child support and seeing his son too often. Mr. Scott eventually spent 2 weeks in jail, a stint that cost him a $35,000 a year job at a filmmaking company and sent him into isolation and alcohol abuse, he told the Post in Korea. I got mad at everybody in the whole world because I just lost the best job I ever had, he said. I just stopped doing everything. And thou shalt grope at noonday, as the blind gropeth in darkness. And thou shalt not make thy ways prosperous. And thou shalt be only oppressed and robbed always, and there shall be none to save thee. Deuteronomy 28, the roar. And thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all the peoples, whither the Lord shall lead thee away. Wahayita lashama, lamashal walishnina, bakol ha'amim asho yenaheka yodewahe shama, lashama, for an astonishment. You still want to fight in their wars, date their women, and say, let's hold hands. A byword, from nigger to African American. A name in place of your true name. Lishnina, that's what that is. A byword, shanina. A place, a name that's not equivalent to your ancestry. An astonishment. Still want to fight in their wars. We are an astonishment to the people when they sit there and take the tolls of us, when they sit there and deal with us, when they sit there and are around us. I wear suit and tie, and when I still go in the elevator with these other peoples of other races, it's like, oh my gosh, what is he going to do? And I'm dressed professionally. Just go to show you what they think about you nonetheless. Deuteronomy 28, the roar. Thou shalt be betroth the wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build the house, and shall not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard, and shall not use the fruit thereof. Macmillan, in her book entitled Why Do Black Men Choose White Women, stated in slavery, the black man will be told, your wife has some good, let's move on. Hugh Thomas, in his book The Slave Trade, spoke how blacks were used to build houses in Pennsylvania. So when it says you shall build a house and not dwell therein, we built the White House. Okay, they're going to say Obama was in there, and there were black men being shot by the police left and right on his watch. Moving along, brothers and sisters, it says what? That the black man will be told that your wife has some good. We're not going to go in that woman's words, but I wanted to quote her precisely. You understand? We get the point. The black man was made to stand outside, while the white man would sit there and have his way with the black man's wife. It didn't get too sexual, but in the movie Crash, you see the European man or the white man groping the black woman, fondling the black woman in front of her husband. And so now later on, she's looking at the black man like, why didn't you protect me? And then the same black woman later on is in a fire in a car, and the same cop who disrespected her is then being shown to have to save her. So in other words, the black man wasn't there to protect the black woman on fear of getting shot by the police. And then the black man wasn't there to protect the black woman when she was being perhaps harmed inside of a burning car. So the white man who disrespected her is the white man who helped her. Don't come to me saying this is a satire, brothers and sisters. Don't come to me with we are indigenous to the Western Hemisphere when it snows in the month of April. That's not a black people's climate, brothers and sisters. I'm not claiming the indigenous song. Our people descend from those of the East. This is why we never find a resting place for the sole of our foot in the West. Next slide. The mask and lock matter. Thou shalt betroth the wife, and another man shall lie with her. Thou shalt build the house and shall not dwell therein. Thou shalt plant a vineyard and shall not use the fruit thereof. What you're looking at right here is a mask with a lock in the back that they used to use in slavery. So our people, when they pick things, could not sit there and eat the fruit of it. Amos chapter 7, verse 17. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, thy wife shall be a harlot in the city, and thy sons and thy daughters shall fall by the sword, and thy land shall be divided by line, and thou thyself shalt die in an unclean land, and Israel shall surely be led away captive out of his land. See, when we went over the map before about the scattering, this is a collage, if I can use that word, of people quote-unquote West Indian and African American that were killed by the police. All right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if it's 10 and 7, that's altogether 70. That's 70 black people, 70 black fathers, mothers, daughters, sons, dead by the hands of the police. So what it said, well, there's black on black crime. Well, aren't the police supposed to protect people from harming one another? Or do the police protect the have from the have-nots? And being that we are already spoiled, that is to say robbed and oppressed, and have nothing really to offer to a great extent to the world, we are part of the have-nots. Next slide. Deuteronomy 28, the roar. We already shown this picture earlier. All right, next slide. Deuteronomy 28, the roar. The man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eye shall be evil against his brother. Let's go, Israel. And against the wife of his bosom, and against the remnant of his children, whom he hath remaining. Brothers and sisters, anytime you see your brother, a black man, and you see him as your enemy, you got a problem. Anytime Israelite camps see each other as a problem, there's something wrong with that. Brothers and sisters, the tender and delicate man among you, the man that is tender, the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil against his brother. How do you have Israelite camps? Let's bring it home to those who lay claim and verbally say they are Yisrael or Yisrael, depends upon what school you're coming from. You understand? How you have camps looking bad at one another? How you have people saying they're either from Yahuda or Yahuda, whatever Hebrew people care to try to claim? How do you have these particular people viewing each other bad? The man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil against his brother. That is witchcraft, brothers and sisters, to sit there and have Israelites viewing other Israelites as bad. That's wickedness before the Most High. You understand? The man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil against his brother. That is part of the curses, not the blessings. So if you're seeing your brother, if you're seeing your neighbor, if you're seeing a fellow Israelite and taking it to those who don't claim to be Israel, if you see a fellow black man and you see him as your enemy, that is a curse. That is not a blessing from the Most High. So let's understand that, brothers and sisters, for edification purposes. Anytime you see yourself hating on, despising, disrespecting another brother, sister, elder, or even a child, that is a curse from the Creator. That is not a blessing. You may want to check how you're moving among your own people, brothers and sisters, because there's no reason why with you got skinheads, KKK, you even got Jewish gangs. You got the so-called Phoenicians, the Beit to Israel, being oppressed by the European Jews in the land of Israel. Just like Khalid Muhammad, and I'm not a Muslim, but just like Khalid Muhammad, and I'm not part of the Black Panther Party, all right? Just like Khalid Muhammad has stated, he didn't find what Brother Malcolm found. When he went to Israel, he saw, end quote, the black Jew under the white Jew. When he went to Mecca, he saw the black Muslim under the white Muslim. And over here, he saw the black man under the white man. So this is something that we wanted to point out for edification purposes, brothers and sisters. Anytime you can sit there and see a brother or a sister and you have an evil eye toward them, that's not good. Bibliography. The Tanakh, Masoretic text. The Bible, King James Version. From Babylon and Timbuktu by Root of Windsor. Hebrewisms of West Africa by Joseph Williams. Israelites and Jews by Kohen Mikael. Caesar and Christ by Will Durant. Encyclopedia of the Roman Empire by Matthew Bunsen. Falasha Anthology by Wolf Leslow or Leslu. Correct me on the pronunciation, no problem. Bibliography 2. The Israelites by B.S.J. ISRAELITES, an authoritative chronology of Hebrew Israelite history by Zebulun ben Levi. Kemet on Trial, Ancient Kemet on Trial by Avdiel Levi, a Moreh, a teacher in Israel. The Truth About Hebrew Biblical Israelite Jews by Ella Hewley. The Bible as History by Warner Keller. The Bible is History by Ian Wilson. Oxford History of the Biblical World by Michael Coogan. Shalom. Giving honor and praise unto the Most High.